Part 2 of the Ultimatum Deadline build, coming up. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is our second installment and probably our final installment of the Ultimatum Deadline build. Now, this rifle was built basically to allow us to review the Ultimatum Deadline action. This is an action from Ultimatum Precision, and if you want to hear the details on the action, make sure you go back and watch part 1. We kind of run over everything that we put into this rifle, and the main purpose of part 2 here is to come back and talk about each component and how well it's worked, and if there's anything on this overall system that I would change if I was doing it again. So we initially built up this rifle here, and then I took some of the experience that I got with this one, and my father actually wanted a very similar system, and so we built up a rifle for him that almost mirrors this build with a few small improvements, and I'll talk about that as well as I go along. Now, this is a 6.5 Creedmoor bolt-action rifle, and it is built around the Deadline action from Ultimatum Precision. And real quick, the specs on this action is it is a short action. It has a 6-degree bolt lift, a 3-lug bolt. It utilizes Accuracy International magazines, and it has 3 different bolt faces available on this action. So you can build it up with a 223 bolt face, a 308 bolt face, or a Magnum bolt face. So you can really set it up to whatever you want. It takes Savage small shank style barrels, so you can utilize pre-fit barrels, and Ultimatum does make their own barrel wrench and barrel nut to be able to install the barrels on this and have everything kind of look nice and match up. So let's go ahead and talk about each component of the rifle, starting at the front. Up front here we have a Modular Driven Technologies Elite brake. This works very well for this rifle. It has a couple of good benefits. First of all, it is a 3-chamber brake. You can see the 3 ports on the side here, and it is very effective. The ports are swept backwards, so it does fire some of that exhaust gas backwards a little bit. So if you have stuff sitting on the table really close to the rifle, you're probably going to blow it over. Additionally, if your spotter sneaks up on the side there, if you didn't get concussion directed out to the side to reflect off of things, then the brake probably isn't doing its job. And this has been a very effective brake for us. I don't really have any problems spotting my own shots when we're shooting off of barricades. I definitely don't have any problems with spotting my own shots when we're sitting prone. So the brake definitely does its job. And it's fairly easy to install. It has an integrated jam nut to the actual brake itself. So the jam nut is threaded onto the body of the brake. To install this, you just simply tighten the jam nut against the body of the brake, screw the brake on until it hits against the shoulder of the barrel, then you loosen the brake until it's indexed, until those ports are flat on the rifle. Once you get that done, you hold it steady, and then you back the nut off of the body of the brake until it hits the shoulder of the barrel, and then snug it down, and now your brake is indexed. It makes it very easy to put it on. You don't have to mess with shims or crush washers or any of that stuff. So I really like that type of installation. Now the drawback is it does require tools to install it and remove it, so if you are using a suppressor and brake interchangeably, you're going to have to take some tools to swap it off to then put your suppressor on. But it's very quick and it's very easy, and you don't have to worry about getting the right shims or replacing a crush washer like you do with some other brakes out there. So I really enjoy it. It's a really attractive finish. It's got kind of a melanite finish on it. Really nice brake overall. No problems at all with that. Now coming back, we have a 24-inch Excalibur Savage pre-fit barrel on here. Now as I said earlier, it is a Savage small shank pre-fit, and the contour is the Savage Varmint contour. Now this is a 1 1/8 twist, and it is chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. This barrel is the 416R stainless. Now in addition to that, it has their cryo treatment on it. This is an $80 upcharge. The barrels are normally about $330. $80 upcharge on that for the cryo finish. I'm still on the fence on if cryo finishing is really beneficial or if it's really more marketing. Unfortunately, I don't have two barrels that I can do an A/B comparison. We may work on that a little bit later in the year, but the claimed benefits of cryo finishing is the barrel tends to be a little bit more stable through different heat ranges. It tends to have a little bit faster velocity, a little bit easier to clean. Those are the claimed benefits on it, and I don't really have any way to refute those. What I can tell you is this has been a very accurate barrel. Excalibur guarantees 1 MOA or better, so if your barrel doesn't shoot 1 MOA, then you send it back to them, they'll inspect it, and so it's covered by a guarantee there. This barrel shot considerably better than that. With factory ammo, we're averaging half MOA. With hand loads, I'm getting between a quarter and half. So very accurate for a pre-fit barrel that we're just screwing in and tightening down. So I'm thoroughly happy with the barrel at that $330 price point. That is really a great price for a barrel that is providing this kind of accuracy. Now, when we come back to the chassis system is the Modular Driven Technologies ESS chassis, and I definitely want to mention that our weekly show, Mail Call Mondays, is sponsored by Modular Driven Technologies, so they were nice enough to provide the chassis system for this build. They also provided the brake, so thank you very much to them for that. But any of you guys that have watched this show for any amount of time know that I'm going to give my honest opinion regardless of who is providing the pieces for the build. So the ESS chassis has worked very well for us, but since the ESS chassis came out, Modular Driven Technologies has released the ACC chassis, the Adjustable Core Competition chassis. That chassis would really be better suited to what we're trying to do here than the ESS chassis. The ESS is really designed more as a competition/sniper setup, hence the ESS, the Elite Sniper System. But the ACC is designed as a pure competition chassis. So there are some similarities and there's some differences. The similarities are really back here in this area. The ACC and the ESS both utilize an AR-style pistol grip mounting interface. We have a regular Modular Driven Technologies pistol grip on here. But if we wanted to, we could put the adjustable grip from the ACC on this. It does go on an AR-type interface. We have the same thumb ramps, same trigger guard area, same mag release, very similar mag well, although the ACC has a much more exaggerated mag fence up here at the front to work as a pseudo barricade stop. I really wish the ESS had it, but the ESS came out before the ACC, so the ACC is an evolution of things that worked well on the ESS and things that needed to be changed. The palm swell up here works very, very well for shooting slung supported. If you have to shoot offhand, this is much more comfortable than the ARCA interface on the ACC. However, you don't do that very often, so it is a really nice feature that isn't used a lot for that type of setup. What it does do is it interferes with being able to bring your bipod all the way back here without putting an ARCA interface on the hand stop or the hand shelf. MDT does make an ARCA interface that will bolt right in here, but then you now make it less comfortable to grip this area with your hand, and it is not a seamless interface with the forward ARCA rail, so you can't just loosen a bipod and slide it back like you can on the ACC. The ACC has from tip to magwell an uninterrupted ARCA channel, so you can, with a bipod like this, the B&T Industries Atlas that I have here, with the Really Right Stuff BTC Pro ARCA adapter, I can just loosen a knob here, and on the ACC I can slide it all the way from the tip all the way back to the magwell. That is beneficial in some stages where you have to go from a long stable bipod, say on a tire, to shooting through a gap in a barricade where you need to be able to extend the rifle through that. So there is benefit to being able to do that. You don't get that here. What you do get here is a more modular forend. On the ESS, you can put whatever kind of forend you want on here. There are a variety of different options. Partial rails on top, full rail on top, no rail on top, carbon fiber, various different lengths. So there is a huge benefit to being able to run the ESS. Also on the ESS, we have a folding buttstock here, which folds all the way over and encapsulates the bolt handle. That is not available on the ACC either. So we do get benefits with the ESS chassis, and I am very happy with the ESS chassis. I really haven't run into situations in competition where it caused me problems. Not being able to get the bipod all the way back is able to be overcome by simply sliding it back to the rearmost position on this Arca rail and then kicking my legs backwards, and I can still get the same kind of effect going on if I need to be able to do that. Now we'll talk about the rail up here, because this is one of the things that has changed. We initially started out utilizing the Modular Driven Technologies Arca rail, and what we found out with that is when used with the Really Right Stuff clamp, the rail and the clamp tended to be a little bit slick, and it would move during the stage of fire, during recoil. Not a big deal. It wouldn't like slide off, but I would find it in a different position than I started out with, and that could be a problem. This is a combined problem between the Modular Driven Technologies Arca rail being very slick. It has a very, very smooth finish on it. And then the Really Right Stuff clamp has really smooth anodizing on it. So you take those two smooth surfaces, get a little bit of dust in there, or a little bit of oil, or a little bit of moisture, and now you have something to lubricate the two surfaces and allow them to slide. We switched over to a Henderson Precision rail for a couple of reasons. First of all, the finish on it is much rougher. It's a rougher anodizing finish. And also it is a much longer rail. If you notice, it actually sticks out beyond the handguard up here, and that was intentionally. I put the longer rail on here because it gives me an effectively longer forend with less weight hanging out here. So now I've got about an extra 2 inches that I can move that bipod out onto and not get in the way of the forend, or not just add extra weight of a forend tube. But I still get to keep my rail up top here if I need to mount something, either a clip-on night vision device or laser designator, or even a flashlight. I can mount a flashlight up there if I need to. Most people won't run the rail up here. They'll run either the plain handguard or the carbon fiber handguard, but we'll get to the carbon fiber handguard here in just a second. Center section, we will talk about the inlet here in just a minute when we start talking more about the action. The magwell will accept both AICS and AW magazines, so you can use whichever interchangeably. I can drop out the 12-round AICS and slap in a 10-round AW magazine. It fits in there just fine. No interference from the bolts. And we will also talk about magazines here in just a second. So overall, I've been very pleased with the chassis. You have plenty of interfaces for slings, so you can actually run the sling supported, which is very nice. You also have enough points back here on both sides that if you have a rear bag like a short action precision bag that has a QD on a leash, you can snap that on here, and if you have to move quickly, your rear bag comes with you, and you don't have to worry about leaving gear on the line, which could cost you points depending upon the match. So let's talk about the action really quick, because that was the whole purpose of this rifle, was to build it up so that I could get some experience with the Ultimatum Precision Deadline action. Now, as I mentioned, the action is a 3-lug. It is a 60-degree bolt lift, which is what I really, really love about this. The bolt comes up very short. It sticks out far to the side here, which means you're working in empty air. You don't have to worry about grinding your hand against your scope, hitting your turrets, all that stuff. It ends up being a very fast action to cycle. Now, I have heard some criticism about the action because, like many 3-lug bolts out there, the bolt runs on the bolt stop. On the left-hand side of the action here, there is a bolt stop that protrudes into the action, and that ends up being a rectangular recess, and the raceway is cut in the side of the bolt. So when you lift the bolt, what stops the bolt there is the actual bolt stop on the raceway in the bolt. When you're bringing the bolt back, the only thing that is keeping that bolt centered in the raceway and not allowing it to flip all over the place is the bolt stop in that raceway cut in the side of the bolt. This has garnered some criticism because it can get sloppy as the bolt stop wears. We haven't any problems with it so far, and as long as you keep that recess relatively clean, then the bolt moves and slides very quickly and very easily. The drawback is that every time you are bringing this back, you are allowing grit, dirt, and dust to get into that raceway, and then when you drive it forward, you're pulling that in, and that will affect how smooth your bolt is running. Whereas if you look at a Remington or a Remington clone, you have two lugs that run in raceways that are cut on the inside of the receiver. So you will get grit and you will get dirt on the bolt body, but very often on actions that are designed for field use and field competition, the tolerances between the bolt body and the receiver are loose enough that that grit can move and it'll get caught in the fluting on the bolt generally instead of actually tying up the action. Now, I say there's been some criticism because I really haven't noticed any issues with it, but I thought I would bring it up because one of the notable rifle builders that I spoke with mentioned it, and he has seen quite a few more of these actions than I have. Now, the bolt head and the fact that it's 3-lug and the fact you can switch between a variety of different bolt faces really is beneficial because I built this up as a 6.5 Creedmoor, but if I decided to go with something like one of the short action Magnums, next year I could swap this barrel off, throw a different bolt face on it, drive on, and go that direction. Now, along the bolt faces, there was one issue that we did run into, and that was actually fairly recently. I was doing some dry fire exercises, and I was not using any kind of snap caps, which is kind of normal. Usually, if I am running fast bolt manipulations, I will run snap caps or dummy rounds to give me that extra drag of feeding the cartridge out of the magazine. If I'm just working trigger drills, I won't. This one I had finished up some trigger drills and I started going into some quick bolt action manipulation, and for some reason I slammed the bolt closed and it wouldn't lock down, and I stopped, assessed what was going on, and when I inspected the rifle I had a couple of pieces fall out onto the carpet. Thankfully, it was on carpet, not out in the field, not out in dirt or grass, because what actually happened is the extractor, which is this little plate that slides in a dovetail in the bolt head, had fallen out. The detent in the spring had also fallen out. I have no idea how this happened because in the rifle it shouldn't be able to fall out. It has two ejectors on the inside of the bolt face that will prevent it from sliding into the bolt, and it has the wall of the action on the outside to prevent it from sliding out. So I don't know how that happened. When I was in Germany at IWA, I had a chance to talk to the guys at Ultimatum, and they're not sure how it happened either. It's the first time they've heard of that occurring. So the stars aligned. Maybe I should have bought a lottery ticket, but I thought I would mention it. It hasn't happened since. It was just a little bit of an issue with the current design. Now we're going to talk about some fitment issues with the deadline action in the ESS chassis. Now, there are problems when you're an early adopter. When you decide to try to be one of the first to put something together, and we were one of the first to do the deadline action in the ESS chassis, you find out things along the way. Because a lot of times when you're talking about a new action and you are talking about a new inlet, then companies might change little things without really talking to each other or broadcasting the change. And the deadline was advertised as a Remington 700 footprint. Well, it's really more of a Remington 700-ish footprint. Most chassis it will bolt into, but there are a couple of little differences. The first major difference is the magazine catch. The magazine catch on the deadline action has to be shorter because the magazine needs to ride lower. If it rides too high, then it will get caught up by the bolt. And actually what ends up happening, the way the receiver's caught, is if you bolt the action into a standard Remington 700 chassis, you won't even be able to get the magazine high enough in the action to latch. The feed lips will impact the bottom of the action and it will just stop before it ever clicks into place. So the latch needs to be, I believe it was 2 millimeters shorter. Don't quote me on that, but I seem to remember that when we were measuring it out. Now, it was easy enough for us because Modular Driven Technologies knew we were going to use this with the deadline, and they provided the appropriate magazine catch when they provided the center section for the deadline. Now, that is where we ran into our second problem because the ESS chassis uses a V-block type bedding system, and the angle of the V-block needs to be slightly different for the deadline than it is for a Remington 700 or clone. This was kind of found out after the fact. Additionally, different length action screws are required for the deadline versus a Remington 700. Now, the initial fix for this was MDT sent out a shim or a spacer with the rear action screw when they sent it to us, but somehow or another something got mixed up in the shipping or in the translation or whatever. And the washer that they sent along that was supposed to be used as the shim actually was too large to go into the hole that the action screw has to go into. There was a mix-up in communication between us, and when they started talking about a shim, because the shim wouldn't fit in the action screw hole, I naturally assumed that the shim would go between the tang and the actual or the chassis itself. Well, this kind of worked. I still need to trim the action screw just a little bit, but once we got everything in there and everything locked down, it worked. It wasn't until we had shot it quite some time, and actually I got into my first match and had some problems with it, that I realized that what I did was not actually the appropriate way to address the problem. So what happened when I put this washer between the tang of the action and the chassis is it jacked the rear of the action up just a little bit. And because we were working with a 60-degree bolt, which has a larger bolt diameter, it rides higher above the magazine lips, and it doesn't get as deep into that magazine lips when it's feeding. And so occasionally I would have a cartridge that would ride nose up and base down in the magazine, and the bolt would skip over that base. It wouldn't catch the cartridge head, and it would catch it further up on the body, and then it would have just enough friction to pull it forward in the magazine and slam it into the feed ramps and pinch it between the bolt and the feed ramp. Well, obviously it wouldn't feed then, and I'd have to come back, and sometimes I could come back and the cartridge would pop up enough to catch it and drive it forward. Other times it would be too far forward and it would pop into the action, and when I came back I would catch the next cartridge and double feed it. So it did cause a pretty significant issue there. It took a couple of matches before I really got it lined out, figured out what was going on, talked to Ultimatum, talked to MDT, and then basically what the shim had to go. The shim had to get out of there, and then I cut the action screw to the appropriate length because standard Remington 700 action screws will protrude up into the action far enough that you will actually catch the cocking piece on the action screw. So it sticks up into the action too far and it won't go forward. The front screw wasn't a problem. The one that MDT sent was the appropriate length. We didn't have any issues there. It was the rear screw that was the issue. Fixing an action screw is not a big deal. You measure it, you throw a nut on it, you take your Dremel or your die grinder, you cut off what you need to cut off, spin or clean it up with a file, spin the nut off, use some cold blue to fix it, and then drive on. So that wasn't an issue at all. But once we got the screw to the appropriate length, and then we tried to tighten the action screws down to a standard torque between 45 and 65 inch-pounds on the front and the back, we ran into some significant issues there. When you tighten down to that much, then you ended up warping the action just a little bit. Because remember I said that V-block is different, or needs to be different between the two. So we ended up warping the action enough that the bolt would bind. The solution to that is running 25 inch-pounds at that rear screw. That's what Ultimatum suggested on this. We loosened it up to 25 and everything ran fine. Now, once the action got broken in, I was able to increase the torque because I like to run a little bit heavier torque. Heavier torque prevents things from moving when you impact them. So I crept the torque up a little bit to where I was just stopping short of binding up the bolt, and there we go. You're good to go there. I won't quote you what it is because that's something that you would need to find out if you tried to do this exact same thing by testing the different torque and just moving the bolt until you got to the point where you started to bind and then back it off a little bit from there. Once we got that lined out, feeding problems went away now because the action is in the correct alignment with the magazine, and then we were able to feed just fine. So again, it's when you're on the bleeding edge, you have to experiment with stuff and you have to be willing to fight through problems. Now the nice thing is we figured all this stuff out when we built my father's rifle in the ESS chassis. We got it all lined out. He didn't have any problems. And his rifle is almost a duplicate of this, except he is running a proof carbon fiber barrel, and he's running a Timney 2-stage trigger because he preferred the 2-stage trigger. So now let's talk about the trigger on this guy, because the trigger causes a little bit of problems as well. Now the trigger we're running in here is a TriggerTech Diamond trigger. Now I will tell you right off the bat that TriggerTech has gotten calls of issues with the trigger dropping the striker on bolt close at very light trigger settings. The Diamond can go very, very light. I believe 8 ounces is the bottom on the trigger pull on it. This trigger right now is set at 1 pound, 1 ounce. So that is where it was set when it came out of the box. When I installed it and practiced with it a little bit, I liked where the trigger was at, so I didn't try to reduce the pull weight from there. So at 1 pound, we have not had any problems at all with dropping the striker when we slam the bolt home, and I've been pretty aggressive with the bolt. So no issues there at all. But what we did find out is when we first installed the trigger hanger, and I tightened it to snug, then the trigger would still wiggle a little bit. It was tight in the hanger, but the hanger was loose on the bottom of the action. This actually utilizes a metal hanger that the trigger installs into, and then the hanger levers into the bottom of the action and has one screw that secures it into the bottom of the action. Well, the screw is fairly small and the threads are fairly fine on it, so I was pretty concerned about stripping the screw. So I was gentle when I put it in, and we used Loctite when we put it in, so we didn't have any issues there. But again, it was a little bit loose. So I ended up contacting Ultimatum again on this because we noticed the same thing installing the trigger on my father's rifle. And Ultimatum told us that the torque spec on that screw is 20 inch-pounds. So although it will bottom out before you get to that torque, you need to go ahead and torque it to 20 inch-pounds, and that sucks that trigger hanger up into there. It actually cuts the last couple of threads on the screw, and it tightens everything down so it's not going to come loose on you. Again, we did that. All of that went away. No other problems with the trigger. We have never had any slam fire issues, and the TriggerTech Diamond trigger, I am very glad it has worked in the system for us because it is a really, really clean trigger. There is no perceptible take-up. There's no perceptible creep in the trigger. It breaks at the pull you set it at, and there's only a tiny bit of over travel afterwards. It is just really a slick trigger. We went with the flat face with the PVD black finish, so it looks really attractive in this rifle, and I really like the way that the flat face feels. It's got a little bit of a lip at the bottom of the trigger, so you know when you're getting down towards the bottom, so you can get your finger in the exact same spot every time. And that flat trigger really helps you get a straight to the rear pull on the trigger face. So really happy with that. It is probably one of the most popular triggers in precision rifle competition right now. So glad we were able to run that trigger. Now, we've run this in 3 or 4 matches now so far. I can't even count how many rounds in training. Overall, the rifle is really right about where I want it to be. The overall weight of the rifle, as you see sitting here with the Nightforce Attacker F1, the titanium mount, and the bipod and mount and Arca rail and all that, is about 16.5 pounds. So that is right about the weight that I like to have on a rifle. Now you can, if you want to lighten this up a little bit, do things like the proof carbon fiber barrel. You can go with the carbon fiber forend. Initially we were going to put a carbon fiber forend on this, but we found that the extended rail on the Deadline Action interfered with the rear edge of the rail on the carbon fiber tube, so we weren't able to do that. But if you want to either trim the rail or you want to machine the tube, that will work just fine. I didn't think it was really worth it for the minimal weight savings between the carbon tube or just a regular open tube without the rail on top. But that's totally up to you. Now, on the weight side of things, because Modular Driven Technologies released the adjustable core competition chassis, they also released M-LOK compatible weights for that chassis system. Well, those weights also work on this system. So if you want to add weight to the forend, or if you want to add weight in certain spots along the forend of the tube, you can do that and balance this rifle out however you want to balance it out. So that was a really nice option now that the ACC chassis is out, should you decide to do something on the ESS chassis. Now, unfortunately, we've spent a lot of time talking about the ESS chassis on here, but currently Modular Driven Technologies does not offer the ESS for the Deadline Action, and it is due to that change in the inlet that I talked about. MDT is aware of that. They are working on the correct inlet for the Deadline Action, but right now, due to their current production schedule, we don't have any word on when it will be available for the Deadline Action again. Hopefully it'll be sometime later this year, but I don't have any information that gives me a solid date at this point. There may be a possibility that the adjustable core competition chassis will be available with the Deadline inlet once they get it worked out. But again, most companies run production in batches, so it's unknown at this time at what point they will get to where they decide to run the Deadline Action again. But be sure to know that as soon as we get information on that, we will let you know, because I would really love to put this barreled action into an adjustable core competition chassis, because that chassis was designed specifically for competition. Until then, though, I am really happy with the ESS chassis. Now, if you're trying to build one of these rifles out right now, there are 2 chassis options that are ready to go and are designed for the Deadline Action. One of those is the MPA chassis, the Masterpiece Arms chassis. They do offer a Deadline inlet, and also JP Enterprises now has a new chassis system that is designed for the Deadline. We actually have one of the JP chassis here in the shop, and as soon as we get done with this, we're going to swap the action into it and see how well it works overall. I would assume that it works just fine, because JP is offering a complete rifle with that chassis built on the Ultimatum Deadline Action. So if you like what you see from the Deadline and you want a complete rifle built on it, you can check out JP Enterprises and they can hook you up. Additionally, Ultimatum is now offering barreled action. So if you don't want to put your own barrel on, you have the option of purchasing a barreled action from them. And we will leave a link down in the description below to where you can go here in the US to purchase a barreled action. Now, because it is YouTube, you'll have to click the link that goes to our website that then gives you the links there. So sorry about the little convoluted thing, but that's the rules. Overall, that is the Ultimatum Precision Deadline build, and I am very happy now with the way this guy's come out. I'm very happy with the accuracy that we're getting out of it. I really did not expect to get sub half MOA out of a pre-fit stainless steel barrel, but we're getting fairly good results with this rifle overall. And that is it for the Ultimatum Deadline build. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything we've covered in this video, please leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you click that little bell icon so that you get notified when we release new videos. And until next time, get out and shoot!